concerning the assembly, because I think that's really, really important, and we need to talk about it. So if you look at your agenda, the first item is number A, and the way I'm going to address these subjects is one by one, and I want to hear from Mr. Raskins in terms of his findings, and then I'd like to hear a response from the board, and after that, if the administration wants to make a response, I would love to hear that also. So let's start with number one. Revision to AMC 3.87030C11, administrative expenses. Mr. Raskins?
Okay, this was our third 5-year review of the plan that's required by code to be done by the Assembly. And we've always done that review for the Assembly. And in that role, I think the concerns have been found in prior years where the contribution rates were significantly too low for the medical costs were addressed by a municipal ordinance that gave the plan participants ability to buy municipal insurance at a discounted rate. So that 5-year review for the Assembly didn't identify any new issues. The second part of this audit was a every 2-year audit that was put in place a couple of years ago in the code that requires us to look at the plan, the administration of the plan. So this is the first year that we've looked at the administrative side of the program and have some findings on that. That's kind of background of what was different than prior years.
Right. But what I'm starting with now, and thank you for that background information, Mr. Raskins, but I am going A through B are issues that I'd like to talk about. And the first one is number A, and it's on page 7, and it's concerning administrative expenses. Okay, the reference is the code 3.87030C11, and I'd like for you to comment on that particular issue, and then I'd like to hear from the board's response and then the administration. It's on page 7. It's number C, but it's A on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. It's like defining number 2, which are a review of Fund 713 administrative expenses. And AMC 8730C11 states that the board has the authority to pay any costs reasonably incurred in connection with the program's administration. When we looked at the expenses for the last 5 years, we found things that could be questionable as far as reasonably necessary to administer this program. We looked at conferences and travel, education, basically for the plan administrator, legal services. Again, there was one instance where legal services were for the plan administrator's employment, and then office equipment. So we recommended to the Assembly that they clarify what this means to be reasonably necessary to administer this program, because there's just some of the stuff could be interpreted not to be reasonable, and some people might say it is. So that's what we recommended.
Okay. Are you done on this? Are you done?
Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Raskins. I'd like to hear a response from the chair of the board, or whoever wants to speak, frankly.
Have Lauren start off.
Okay. So this one finding.
So the one finding,
Thank you.
expenses for the operation of the medical trust, conference and travel. That is a necessary expense for the education of trustees. They need to know what their responsibilities and duties are, and that's decided by the trustees. They vote on who is to go and receive this education. It's common practice among boards to do so. Legal services.
Before we leave, can I ask a question, Madam
Certainly.
Chair? So then it was only board members who traveled?
Board and administrator.
Okay.
They're allowed to take one educational conference, expenses for one educational conference per term, not to be in their final term of, or final year of term.
term is 3 years.
They quite frequently go to the International Foundation of Employee Benefits conferences, which is a good source of education for this type of trust. Education for the administrator, that was approved by the board for further education. It's common practice, again, for educational benefits to be extended to employees, and this is one that they voted on and approved for the administrator. Legal services, many of those were for, all of them were for the operation of the trust, various reasons. And office equipment, you cannot run an office without equipment, and things wear out and things need to be purchased. The city doesn't purchase all our materials, and quite frankly, we're going to have more expenses coming on office equipment.
Would the administration like to respond?
The only comment I have with respect to this, and Lauren's point, he's exactly right. The trust, these are funds that come out of the trust, that are voted on by the trust, and come out of trust funds that have been set aside for their administrative purposes. The only thing that I would mention that has been a bit problematic is because that Lauren's position is currently a municipal employee that is not subject to the provisions of Title III. Some of the issues associated with approving, we don't approve travel, we the municipality don't approve his travel, we don't authorize the travel, and we don't account for his time associated with that travel. So we're asked to sign off on leave slips, or we're asked to sign off on leave slips and time cards that frankly we have no accountability for. So in that respect, it was somewhat problematic. I think we have just most recently addressed some of those concerns because the function of the trust has been spun off into its own budget unit. So there's greater accountability, and those kinds of authorizations come directly from the board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zero. Mr. Monoman?
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, disclosure that I am a retired APD employee and I do receive medical benefits to the trust. I've not received any funding from a reimbursement as of this date, but I am eligible for that. So I just want to make that fully disclosing, and I wouldn't take any official action as a result of any potential conflicts. But the question I would ask, I guess, Mr. Askins, is if what was explained by the plan administrator here was written in some sort of a policy or procedure, would that meet, I guess, what you would be recommending as some sort of listed authorized expenditure? What is reasonable with that?
I just think some clarification could be added to the code so that when we have to do another audit in 2 years, we have some criteria to go after. Because we could all look at each one of these things and say it's reasonable or not reasonable to run that trust. And remember, the dollars coming out of here are coming out of that trust fund.
Correct. I guess what I'm saying is other travel of the municipality or any of its employees, is that in code or is it more in policy and procedure?
That's in policy, and it also goes through the, what do you call it? The
Cost Containment Committee.
And then to turn a lot of stuff down.
Okay. I think Mr. Raskow.
Right?
I just wanted to point out that this trust is similarly run to the Police and Fire Retirement System Board, and they also do not go through the Cost Containment Committee, Police and Fire Retirement System. They administer their trust. It's a little bit different in that we don't receive funding for the administrator's position as lined out in the ordinance. However, the funds for travel come from the trust fund itself, and we have very strict limitations on making sure members follow up with that training and only receive one. I have been on that trust since inception, since 1995, and I believe I have the most travel, which is 2 times. I've gone to 2 conferences since 1995, so in 15 years I've gone twice, except for the plan administrator, who we have sent for continuing education on an annual basis. So other than that, no trustee is cleared. 2 trips in 15 years, I think, is not exorbitant. Follow the future financial responsibilities of the trust.
And Madam Chair, if I could clarify, I mean, we talk about the funds, these costs are being paid for by the fund, okay? But the way the fund gets its money is from appropriations to the police and fire department that go into 2 other funds that eventually get to that fund. So, I mean, it is tax dollars that are paying for, that are going into the
That's
fund,
actually-
from which then these expenses are paid, so.
That's actually not correct.
Well-
There's a seed money that was originally taken, which is $2 million, and all the expenses of the trust are taken from that original seed money. The money that comes to the trust through the plan is only used to pay benefits to its members, and the administration of the plan does not take any of those funds ever to administrate the plan. The administration money comes only from the original $2 million seed money, which we have grown to above $4 million at this point. So there is no new municipality money since 1995 that has gone towards the administration of this trust, except for it's lined out in the ordinance under the running of the trust.
Do you want to respond?
No, that's fine, I'll follow up, because,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
another related point
Oh,
later.
okay.
Thank you, though.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any comments on this particular issue?
Didn't buy birthday parties or flowers or anything, did we, Peter, or we?
Didn't
Could be
show that in
reasonable,
the
could not.
audit.
I don't know.
Got
Well,
it.
you didn't find it, anything like that in the
No.
audit, did you?
The attachments.
Sarcasm, but
The
just
appendix,
like to know
Well,
where
it's
the
a
limits
fair
are.
question.
Yeah,
You know, there's a lot of flowers that have been bought in the
yeah,
municipality.
we've had that issue probably before, so.
But when we looked at it, funding the bachelor's degree for the administrator, who was a municipal employee working under employee relations.
Sure.
Didn't seem to quite fit that definition.
Didn't gel, right.
Unless the assembly would like to include it.
I understand. You
So
guys need
some
more
of the other
direction
things
from
that we
us?
looked at.
I think you'd open the floor to any more questions on that. Are you expecting any direction from us on changes to that policy, or are you comfortable doing it the way you're doing it now?
We're very comfortable the way
Okay.
we're doing it. We have good policies that are in place. I mean, we're not just taking each issue on, case by case. We've actually developed policy. Travel once every 3 years as a board member.
Yeah.
And like Andy said, 16 years, 15 years he's been on the board. He's had 2 travels.
Yeah, well-
I mean, we don't abuse this, and everything comes before the board, and we vote on it before anybody does anything.
I wasn't raising it to debate it, I was just saying that if you're to have, I don't see anything personally, that there's anything that's an arbitrary decision made by one here, so when that happens, it's a little bit more questionable in terms of, as long as everybody's aware what's going on, and saying, we concur, that's not excessive. I mean, if they're Malibu trips and you're playing golf, 3 days a week for an evening meeting, that's one thing, but they sound like they're convention-based stuff and appropriate, so I don't have anything. Do you anticipate voting on these suggestions of yours?
No.
Yeah, no, I'm good to move on.
Thank you, Mr. Starr.
One other comment, there's been no complaints received from any of the trust members.
Dan Moore sits on our board.
And in follow-up to Mr. Starr's question regarding, do I anticipate voting on any of these? Absolutely not. I just wanted to have a discussion, and, hear from each side, and then open discussion. I think that's what we're doing. But one question that I have, not questions, but one thing that I would like to see is a copy of your policies. I think that would just be a really good idea, if you don't mind, and I think it would answer questions from maybe this group or our colleagues, because I give my report at the Senate meeting on Tuesday.
Would you like us to send it out to all the assembly?
That would be great. That would be great. That would
We
be
have that in
wonderful.
PDF. so-
Before Tuesday's meeting if possible, because that's when I'm going to give my report, under committee reports from this meeting. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to number B. Revision to AMC 3.87, not funded, and that is on page 8 of 11, 4B, and I was anticipating Lucinda speaking, but you're sitting in for her, so could you address this? First off, let me back up a minute. I'd like to hear from Mr. Rossi first. I missed that part. Thank you.
Okay, in 2008, when the assembly passed the ordinance that applied a discount to the municipal health insurance, for some reason, there was no funding side on it, even though there was a SEA, a statement of economic effects, that's listed, $1 million to it. So we don't know why that went through without a funding source. Because of that, the fund has been absorbing the costs. The municipal 603 fund, which is our health, self-funded health
Self-insured
insurance,
health plan.
which is partially paid for municipal employees and partially paid by the city. So it didn't seem right that that fund should absorb the cost for a discount to a small group of retired employees. So since this audit, I think they've now started hitting the police and fire budgets for it.
And that's where I can speak
Yeah.
just, okay, Ms. Madam Chair. I mean, we were talking about a first quarter budget amendment, because Pete is correct that in FY10, the rest of us covered that cost in our department contributions to 603, or it just ate into the fund balance.
Correct.
It's a better way probably to characterize it. So we were looking at a budget amendment, will be what we'll talk about, putting forward in order to pay for this increased cost. The problem will be then that this isn't part of your, the original $2 million, which has grown to $4 million. These will be tax dollars that would be being paid on behalf of the recipients of this benefit. So maybe there's a bigger policy question about the appropriateness of doing that, but that's what we will be discussing when we talk about our first quarter budget amendments.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Raska.
How much money are we talking about?
I think it's about
About
$500,000.
523,000
For
coming up for
2011.
this year.
A year?
For 2011. Well, yeah, last year it was about 250, and then this year it's 523, because it's the gap, it's a formula for determining what the discount is based on our current rates, and because rates went up considerably during this past year.
Can I ask another question of
Sure,
the board?
thank
What's
you.
the expectation of membership? Is that's a benefit, obviously they rely on?
This covers only employees hired 1995 or before that hadn't retired, that were active members in 1995. The total group is, how many, Lauren?
338.
338. They're an aging population. I'm probably one of the younger ones at 52. And we expect approximately a third of those members to eventually take the city's insurance, and that's what costs the $500,000. Is that correct?
I haven't speculated on a
Okay.
third.
My speculation is approximately 1/3. It could be more, it could be less. But anyway, the expectation is about $500,000 a year, and it probably will start to diminish over the next few years as the population begins to die off.
The user group will, but the cost of the benefit, you suspect that will go up?
Hold on.
Okay,
No, I'm asking you to hold on.
sorry.
Do you anticipate the cost, well, Lauren might be better answer that.
Sure.
The population will decrease in the 328 to 300, but will the cost benefit go up?
Cost
It's
benefit.
528 this year, and it'll continue to escalate even.
The difference, the subsidy will increase as the cost of insurance increases. However, there is also increase in the benefit. The benefit is increased by the medical CPI, and typically the cost of the benefit is increased by anywhere from 2 to 4 times of that.
Okay.
And this should needs corrective measure, obviously, because we have to, but we want to wait till they bring their
Right,
amendment forward.
thank you, Mrs. Starr. And Mr. Horman, could you just hold on for one moment, because I'd like to hear a response from Lauren at this point. Thank you.
Well, you were talking about first quarter budget revisions, how it'd be charged to the current police and fire operating budgets.
I mean, that there is a requirement for an additional $500,000 to be appropriated to cover this cost, so it doesn't continue to come out of the Fund 603. In terms of the fund source, that's what we need to talk about. Where are we going to get the money? From which fund is it going to come? I.e., tax dollars or what? So that's the policy discussion that still needs to take place.
And as soon as you respond, we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, I'm still a little bit lost on what your question was there, but
How about
Did
just
ask one.
responding to the subject?
respond to
Yeah,
the subject.
Thank you.
Well, right now it's being built back to the police and fire current operating budgets, so there is a funding source. Right now, the police and fire operating budgets make annual contributions to fund 313, which is supposed to pre-fund the entire liability. That liability keeps fluctuating, based upon the projections in the medical CPI, and that's why they do their actuarial studies. The medical inflation has been historically lower than what the projections have been, and I'm a little perplexed as to why the current operating budget is hit with different amounts for discounts, or subsidies and for their annual contribution to the pre-funding. The suggestion would be to bill it all to pre-funding.
Thank you. Mr. Horman, you had a
Well,
comment?
I guess that, so that I explain the picture better, because my understanding was just as you described it, that the entire amount of monies that was either reimbursed or paid for a medical cost to a retiree came from the fund. So if the dollar amount was $1,000, it came out of the fund. If the dollar amount was $2,000, it came out of the fund. And that only those active employees is being paid by the police and fire budget into what's the difference, the differing amount, into the fund. So am I correct in that?
This is actually a discount for our health insurance costs. The amount that each employee pays for the cafeteria plan they pick, this ordinance actually gave a discount to that. So it's a loss of funding instead of anything else. It also doesn't affect the trust. It affects the 603 fund, because the 603 fund, actuarially, they set their rates based on revenues coming in and actual expenses. So when revenues go down because of discount, now the cost to everybody else goes up. So it doesn't affect the retirees, it doesn't affect the trust, but it affects the 603 fund and the rest of the city employees.
And you're saying that by having those police and fire employees in the discount 603 fund, that it's impacting 250,000 in 2010, the projected 520,000 in 2011.
Right, but there should have been a funding source for it when the ordinance was passed.
So
That
then
was the problem.
if I'm hearing Ms. Lawrence say that from the C313 fund,
Got nothing to do with it.
there's no way to reimburse that from the fund, to allocate money from
Well,
313
I
to
guess if that's
603?
what they want to do, I don't know.
Before you, Nancy was next.
Yeah, thank you. I thought I might try to rephrase this a little bit, is that prior to 2008, participants in the Police and Fire Medical Trust had the option of purchasing municipal, although they were not part of the group, they had the option of purchasing municipal insurance through that was available through the 603 fund, through a regular plan. With their benefit. They could use their benefit dollars to help purchase municipal insurance. What happened in 2008 is that because the rate of that insurance, the premiums associated with purchasing that insurance had gone up faster than the benefits that were being received by the medical trust beneficiaries, it was determined that they could get, that the people who were participating in the municipal health program could get a discount. So fundamentally, what this amounts to is that the portion of the beneficiaries that purchase municipal insurance versus their own insurance or something else get this discount. So from an equity standpoint, they're getting a greater benefit. Fundamentally, they're receiving more of a benefit than the other trust members who have the formula that are there. The problem is, where does the money for that extra benefit come from? Where does that discount, that money that closes the gap between what they're purchasing, what the cost of the municipal health plan is, and what they're paying for, where does that money come from? And as Lauren mentioned earlier, the police and fire departments currently are charged to fund the trust appropriately for the benefits. And at least initial discussions among the administration is that that's probably where the money needs to come from to fund this discount. But again, the discount only benefits those people who actually subscribe to municipal insurance, and it's not across the board. Does that help at all?
Before you, unless you want to respond to.
Well, I guess the follow-up with that is, my understanding is when this entire trust was established, created by code, I believe the assembly, the administration was to report to the assembly on a regular basis. I don't know the number off the top of my head. I want to say every 5 or 6 years, something like that, supposed to review to make sure that the fund, and I believe 313 is the number, is appropriately funded.
That was the Assembly's responsibility, and it's indicated in this audit. And I remember it really clearly when I was at Yeah.
And the I'm sorry.
So where
From
we-
a
where the
from a
assembly
five-year
allocates-
standpoint, that's what this audit was, one of the five-year audits. But this particular discount came on an interim basis. So this is the first audit
Right.
subsequent to the implementation of the discount.
Correct, it was a revision.
Did you want to make another comment?
Well, I agree with pretty much everything she said. There is a gap between, what happens is if you're a 25-year employee, you get a benefit level, and I'm not exactly sure what it is, it's around $700. You have the option to purchase the low PPO 1300 plan, which I believe costs around $900. So there's about approximately a $200 gap. And I know these numbers aren't exact, so excuse me. That $200 gap then is what a 25-year employee would be able to purchase. An employee with less than 25 years is going to have to purchase it based on his current program allowance, which might be $600. So he has to pay $100 for that insurance and so forth, each level below. Those funds have not been pre-funded in the 1303 fund, I believe is the fund. They have not been pre-funded. So the funds she's speaking about that is charged back to the police and fire are those funds that have not been pre-funded. The actual money that they receive in their HR health reimbursement accounts, the $700 is already pre-funded in that pre-funding account. So that is correct.
Right, thank you. Mr. Robbins?
Not to confuse the matter, because we're kind of getting away from what we're here for. We've got 3 ordinance changes here that came in the audit, and we're on B. Pete just said a few minutes ago, this doesn't concern the trust. Why is it in the audit? That's our confusion. Why is it in the audit? Maybe a budgetary item for the municipality to handle, but why is it in our audit? And what is being asked for us to change to fix whatever the budget problems that they have? So I'm just pointing that out. Pete just said a few minutes ago that it doesn't affect the trust, but he's making a recommendation that we change the trust ordinance for this item, and it doesn't make sense to me.
Would you like to respond, Mr. Brown?
Well, it is part of the audit because the ordinance had to do with the trustees, and our prior year's audits for the 5-year reviews always addressed this disparity between the cost of the insurance versus the contribution rate. This fixed it. And we had to comment on that. But then we looked at the funding source for it, and there was no funding source. The recommendations to the administration to fix it. It's that simple. It wasn't to the trust.
So my follow-up question is, what ordinance change would you be recommending to fix this in our?
This is not an ordinance change. This is a funding source for budgeting purposes.
Thank you.
And the reference, though, is 3.87 based on AO 2008-100S that was passed by December. That's the reference.
Say that again.
Okay.
AO.
Do you folks have an audit? No. Okay, AMC 3.87. Okay, the finding is based on an ordinance that the Assembly passed, 2008-100S. I don't know when, but it must have been in the middle of the year.
Actually, Madam Chairman, it was passed in 2009, but it was Mr. Teshy's. That may jog your memory, but it got approved in 2009.
Okay. I'm just thinking about when I was elected.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
but
a
it
little
was after,
confusing.
yeah, it was after Sullivan came in, it was real quick after that, so.
Okay.
Like-
Well, I wish I had copies of it, but I don't, so, but anyway, does anybody else have any comments on this before?
Question. Last year, at the end, I know with the medical premiums for the city, that the administration sets those premiums that employees are going to pay, and then they've done that by projecting claims they think they'll have during the year and health costs. At the end of the year, last year, did they end up with a surplus or in a deficit situation?
We were in a deficit.
Deficit.
There was a significant, yes.
Okay. And I asked that because in prior years, remember we had 3.8 million left over a few years ago, and the mayor spent it on fuel surcharge or something, extra fuel costs. But you look at it as always as a spending. But sometimes we have a pretty good sum of money left at the end of the year, and maybe that could be considered, albeit late, a funding source. It just
Okay, and back to Mr. Robbins' comment regarding whether or not the Assembly had to bring forward an ordinance. No, we don't, and everybody agrees that we don't. The issue here is what's the funding source going to be? And so I think we need to have a little bit of discussion on that. We have about a half an hour left and one more issue after this on the funding source. Ms. Frasco already mentioned that the administration is bringing forward an ordinance, a resolution, well, during first quarter budget revision, a funding source, but for today, not for future, correct?
Well, we're just collecting the requests from the departments right now.
Right.
And so this will be one of the amendments that we will talk about in term, and make a recommendation in our proposals. So we don't have the answer today.
No, not today, and when I
Right.
said today, I mean first quarter.
For 2011,
So,
for 2010.
For
2011.
2011, yeah, for first quarter, yeah. And is it going to address future payments? And that's the part.
Probably, unless we come up with some formula mechanism.
Yeah,
Otherwise,
that's
it'll be
what
an
I-
annual appropriation, which is similar to what we currently do for other aspects.
Right,
So-
right, and
yeah.
so,
It
right.
would be something that we have to
Right, and
consider.
so with that said, while we're here today, at this meeting, and the board's here, I'd like to hear a response from you on what Ms. Frasca is going to propose to the Assembly during first quarter budget revisions, in terms of how we fund this. Mr.
Under the,
President.
there's currently a shortfall in the actual benefit costs of the police and fire retirement system. And I believe this year was $8 million, is that correct?
8.5.
$8.5 million. Those funds are coming direct from both employees who are still active in about a $300,000 amount, and the remaining amount of $8.2 million is coming, I believe, appropriately from both the police and fire department budgets, and those funds were added to those budgets. It would make sense to me that the funds are similarly handled in this case, that those funds are handled out of the police and fire budgets. Obviously, that's going to affect where, how you taxably get those monies, but this is a police and fire budget item, in my opinion, as a taxpayer and as a trustee.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we go on to number C? Okay, number C, finding AMC 3.87031, B1, exemption of the Board of Trustees from provisions of English Municipal Code Titles 3, 6, and 7. Mr. Asmat, you have the floor first, please.
During the audit, we looked at this provision in a discussion with Mr. Bretz. He had written, I think he felt that this applied to the administration of the plan as well as the Board of Trustees. And
Can we back up 1 minute?
Sure.
Does everybody here know the references to Title 3, 6, and 7? Okay, Title 7 is purchasing, 6 is finance, and 3 is employee relations.
Personnel rules.
Personnel, yeah, thank you.
so there were several instances during the last couple of years where it appeared that the trustees also felt that Mr. Brett was exempt from these provisions. For example, when the administration came in with a furlough for non-resident employees, the Board of Trustees said, he's not one of them, he doesn't have to participate. So there was a legal opinion that was written by Mr. Lafre's office that kind of agreed with it. During these discussions, Mr. Brett said, well, we're just like the Police and Fire Retirement Trust. So we looked the code up and found that, unlike this one, they do have to follow Title 7 and Title 3 and submit a budget for their expenses. So we thought, well, if the medical trust thinks they're like the retirement trust, maybe the code could be revised to be similar. So brought this to the attention of the Assembly to see what they thought about it. I do also another unofficial legal opinion that states that Board of Trustees, rather than the plan administrators, exempt from certain provisions of code, saying that he does have to follow code. What does add money to this issue is that when they buy equipment, they don't go to purchasing. They go down and buy it from retail. And they could certainly benefit from the purchasing department and Title 7 in competitive purchases to buy the stuff they need to run this thing. So it was brought to the attention of Assembly. It said it's up to Assembly to see if they would like to clarify this and make them similar or
That's
what.
why we're here today. Any comment, Mr. Holman?
I don't know whether it's to both, I suppose, the administration and to the plan. If the plan, the medical health trust, is supposed to, or should function similar to the retirement board plan, do you see any issues or problems, or is there a recommendation that we, through our bodies, should we look at an amendment to the code?
And before that question is answered, Mr. Horner, I would like to hear a response to Mr. Raskin's audit finding from the board. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Starr?
I'll be on the list.
Okay.
I'd like to, this is Lauren, and I'd first like to address the issue of furlough. And the retirement system, their employees also did not take furlough. The budget, I don't understand what that would accomplish to pass that through the assembly. The trust is governed by the laws of the state of Alaska, and as such, they must only spend the money in a fiduciary responsible way. The expenses that they have on office is very small, and they are reasonable. If we were to purchase through the municipality, that's an added layer of administration. For the small amount of purchases that are involved, it's much simpler to go down to Office Depot or to Costco when things are on sale and get the supplies that are needed and get back to work.
I just have one question before I go to Mr. Starr, Mr. Honeman. And if you can answer this, great. If you can't, that's fine. But what's your supply budget annually? Just roughly.
It's less than 10,000.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Honeman first, and then Mr. Starr.
I guess I stand with the same. I understand. I think I'm getting a picture of, particularly Personnel 3 for the Chapter 3 or Title 3, which is administration through the personnel rules. But as it goes to purchasing and to finance, and you can see where if the medical trust were to be short in funding, there's a fiduciary responsibility of the municipality and its taxpayers as a whole to make that number up. And I guess, as Ms. Raskin defined, if there's a shortfall, then the money comes from somewhere. The funding source has to be ultimately the taxpayers. Now, when times are great and things are flush, well and wonderful, and all that seems to be one issue. But from the other side, it appears to be that there's got to be some consistency. If I guess it's kind of like, well, it is. It's the kind of like. If you're kind of like the retirement board, and they're under all these titles, chapters, then should not also the medical trust board. So I don't know what the administration's recommendation is.
Mr. Starr.
Yeah, kind of the same vein. I have comparative speak with our Board of Supervisors out in Chugiak Volunteer Fire Department, and they sort of say the same thing. Hey, we're independent, we raise our own money, we blah, blah, blah. And, I don't say that blah, blah, blah derogatory. The problem is I see it as a public entity transparency requirement to sort of put all this out in front of folks, especially as Mr. Honeman says, when you sort of have issues that maybe come under question later on. So unless it's terribly burdensome to sort of draft a budget and sit down with the budget folks, that element I seem to make sense to do. And the purchasing requirements, we took away CSA some time back, which would have been a viable entity in terms of the buying volume that you're doing, but it makes sense. Those guys in purchasing know what they're doing. And it would be, I think, less administrative and less bureaucracy to say, hey, put me on the list for X and buy it. I don't find that to be problematic, if you want to know my opinion. If we're going to take a vote or move to policies, directives, then we'll weigh in the entire assembly body. But I think it's a prudent thing when you're talking public exposures and public transparency, not overly burdensome. So, accountability before, then later on to justify why it kind of happened. It's easier for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honeman.
First speaking to Peter's talk about the layoff of the furlough provision. I was the chairman, I believe, at the time that was going on, and Peter came to me, and I believe I talked to a couple of the people with the administration who wanted Lauren to take a layoff, and actually he dictated that he would. And I said, why don't we, prior to doing this, prior to the board right now hasn't taken this matter up, and so I can't give a cent for the trustees bill, but we need to get a legal opinion, because I believe that, as I understand the trust, this is not correct. And so can we go back to the municipality's attorney and ask him if this is correct? The municipality attorney said, no, it wasn't correct, and he did not have to take that. So we went with the city's attorney's opinion with that and took no further action. So to say that the trust somehow was acting different there was just not correct. The city's attorney agreed with that. Secondly, I guess I would ask Peter, did you come up with any purchases that were, that looked bad? Because this is a this is a one or two person, we have a one person office with an assistant, and we buy paper. I think our printer costs $1,000 or something like that. I mean, we have a very small office. We run to Costco when we need a bundle of paper. We need some pens, things like that, but we don't have a lot of equipment. And all our IT stuff, when we hook up to the city, has to go through IT. So I mean, to say that we need to get trained in all the city's purchasing situations here, I guess I agree that it needs to be transparent, and our budget is transparent. We're happy to, we have it audited every 2 years. And we have to be signed off. We vote on anything that we spend above $500 as a board, and we have city members and outside members on that board. So to say that, we have all those safeguards in place. And then, thirdly, to speak again to the city doesn't administrate this program except for to provide funding for that one person. Our part-time person is paid for out of the trust funds, and we've been growing that trust fund. The $2 million seed money is in excess of $4 million now. In fact, it's so far in excess that even if we get a bank rate of return of 1%, we have enough money to fund the trust until the end of until the last person comes out the door. There's enough money there. So, to say that we need to be, of course, into this title, I think it would just be burdensome on the trust when we already have many safeguards. We have a budget, we have an audit committee, we have all those things in place, and we don't have any alleged impropriety. Well, why are we making this change? It doesn't seem, to me, it seems a little bit...
Well, you're not yet, it was a recommendation.
Yeah, I understand the recommendation, and I understand, Peter's a good friend of mine, and I know he's trying to do the best job he does, but, and he's not looking at it from my position, and I appreciate that, but, we have all those safeguards in place, and we really restrict our travel. Two travels in 16 years, and we don't spend a lot of money. In fact, if there's anything, I argue against almost every expenditure we have, and I'm making sure. You want to find the guy that wants to get the best deal. I'm that guy, and I think the rest of the trust members are the same way.
Thank you. Ms. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you, and I don't have an opinion on the finances, on how that runs or whether purchasing should be. But I do have some observations with respect to Title III, if you don't mind my commenting on that. And I always feel compelled to say this has nothing to do with Lauren, it has nothing to do with the relationship, but because the trust ran through the employee relations budget, I've had an opportunity to take a close look at this ordinance and to try to determine what that relationship is. And I think that the furlough issue only pointed out sort of the paradox associated with this. What the ordinance requires is that the only funding outside of the actual trust that the municipality is responsible for is the funding for up to one administrative position to assist the board. The way I read it, and I certainly I wasn't here when it was fashioned, but it almost anticipates that this is not a municipal employee, but rather we're providing, as they have with their part-time employee, that the municipality is funding that position and that they are not under the auspices of Title III, which is the personnel rules, because it is, in fact, their employee. The paradox or the problem comes here is that, in fact, Mr. Bratz is a municipal employee. So he is a participant in our municipal benefit programs. He is covered by our workers' compensation programs. The municipality is accountable for him as an employee. So this sort of dilemma associated with, there is no question that the trust was established as an independent entity, but the person who is serving as their administrative support person is a municipal employee and accountable to the city and accountable to the taxpayers. And this came up quite honestly, I started really paying attention to this because, as I say, it was running through my budget. It was running through the employee relations budget. And I was looking at the amount that we were funding for this position and asking myself, is this the best way to provide those services? At that time, when I started questioning it, I did meet with the board, with the trust board, and I said, you know, what seems to me is that there might be three options. One is do what the ordinance originally intended, or the way it says, which is we write you a check every year and you go hire your own guy, you know, to provide the administrative support services. That clearly is the cleanest, most reasonable, places the accountability and the fiduciary responsibility squarely on the board, which is quite honestly where I think it belongs. Also in the ordinance is sort of an allusion to the possibility of folding these functions in with the police and fire retirement, you know, to have it co-managed. Because many of the functions are the same. They're paying benefits, they're managing investments, not commingling the funds, mind you,
Right.
but necessarily having, and again, the municipality would write a check to them to fund the extra position that might be required for whatever marginal additional administrative support was required. But that way you don't have two separate trusts in terms of the administration. The third, which was purely self-interest on my part, was I was looking at the cost, and because the ordinance says that we would fund up to a full-time position, we looked into what the cost would be for outsourcing claims administration. You know, if we were to piggyback on a current contract that the municipality had, and then reduce that to a part-time position to provide the board support functions and the administrative support functions. And what we found was that the claims administration, which, you know, I can't speak to what portion of Lauren's job is on that, but a claims administration is somewhere between $20,000 and $25,000 a year. And that is a provider who specifically does HRA type benefit administration. So it was certainly something that we looked at, because when I was looking at my budget, I'm saying, is there a more efficient way to provide these administrative services? So I think that there's some options, but again, getting back to the underlying dilemma is that while the trust is a separate entity, the employee that provides the administrative support to that is a municipal employee. So it's sort of this accountability issue.
Thank you. I just have a comment to make. The trust says that the municipality will fund up to one full-time position. Is it clear whether or not that one full-time position includes benefits or not? Because to me, when I think of one full-time position, I think about everything that goes with it, you know?
Right, no, it says up to one full-time position. I will tell you that I looked into doing some market research about what benefit administrators, what the current market is for benefit administrators, and going to the higher side, in the open market, benefit administrators are paid about between $55,000 and $60,000. And then
benefits.
And then you know, if you were to add a generous 50%, if you were to add, let's say, a generous 50% of benefits on top of that, it would be about $90,000. Currently, the fully loaded cost for this position is $118.
Okay. I was kind of numbers were going through my head when you said 60 and then 50, and then you came up with 90, but then you said 118, so we're on the same page. Okay. Would you like to respond to the comment that was just made by Ms. Sarah? Yes or no? It's totally up to you. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just giving you an opportunity.
Is the municipality's, yes, I would like to respond.
Okay, I'm going to ring the bell.
Sorry. It is the municipality's responsibility to to fund that position for the administration of the trust, and if there's a more economical way for the administration of the trust to occur, it's the duty and responsibility of the Board of Trustees to find that way. And if there's any savings to be made, which our research doubts highly, that savings would belong to the members of the trust.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing, okay, the three issues, basically, when it comes to the code. Budget, okay, Title VI, purchasing, Title VII, and then whether or not that position is going to be included in the personnel section of the code, Title III. And I'd like to hear some comments, if possible, from the administration and also my colleagues that are still here, if you'd like to make any.
Well,
Mr. Holman?
Again, I'd be the first one to say, although I'm entitled to receive benefits through the program, and in fact, there's a deposit every month for into the retirement health, because I was in that Plan 3 and didn't meet the age nor the years of service, so I don't have the max, I guess. I don't even know what the dollar amount is, but I know that it keeps adding in there, and I haven't used a penny of it yet. I thought I had a fairly good understanding back when the trust was developed, and this, just real briefly, is as a result of litigation, there was a settlement, there was some agreements made at that time, it was codified, there was agreements made, and obviously some of the people aren't even sitting in this room as to what was ever intended or what was believed to be the obligations of the municipality and how this thing would even work, functionally to administer. But it's clear to me that, as with anything where there's dollars that you can connect back to taxpayer dollars, I think Mr. Starr, I agree with him, is transparent and visible, and we know what's going on. I'm very comforted by the fact that, and again, I'll be the first one to say, although I've had conversations in the past with several members and some of our former colleagues, but I didn't know the length and the details that had gone into what the board has done as a board in opposition to set policies, procedures, and checks and balances in with the monies of the administration of this fund. So I'm fairly comfortable with the way things are running. I'm very thankful that the administration at every level, a CFO, OMB, employee relations, are concerned enough to say, hey, we think we can do this more efficiently. Because in the end, I think what Mr. Warren Brett has said is that, look, if we can find some savings somewhere and get this done cheaper, let's do it. But by the way, that money goes back to the trust. That goes back to the plan, because otherwise, we keep nickel and diming that. Pretty soon, we will be going after more taxpayer dollars to make up for the unfunded liability that's sticking out there to an actuarial. So thankful that everybody's mindful of watching that. I think it's good. As to my opinion, as to the extent of, and I know there's probably further dialogue, and I know we're coming up on time.
Well,
As to,
I can tell you right now, folks, I don't think there's any rule or law in the books that says we can't go past 2:30, and I think this is an important enough subject to kind of spend at least maybe 15 more minutes on the subject, and if anybody has some heat, bye.
I think that from my perspective, I believe that from the personnel side of it, under 3, I know that it's unique. There's no doubt that I believe Mr. Brett's, and I'm not sure if are you the first plan administrator? Second. And I believe both the plan administrators have been in this unique position of being hired as a municipal employee, for lack of a better term, and placed as administrator of the plan. Paid out of municipal written check, and all that was done, my understanding is, by settlement that was codified, and everybody understood, and we continue to march. I'm a little confused as to why now, and I appreciate Mr. Rathman's look into this, but why now we're just now taking up the issue of where does this guy, this position, taking out Mr. Brett's, but where does this administrator fit, and what does it mean functionally? So, because I'm sure there's been more than one audit, and why this hasn't come up, I don't know.
This is the first required 2-year administration audit that I've had to do. The other ones have been the 5-year reviews for the assembly on the intent of the plan only.
Okay, so that, I think it's becoming clearer to me now that at that time, those audits did not bring into the fold an administrative, what it took to administer the plan.
That's correct.
Okay. All right, and then functionally, I would say that if there's monies being spent of taxpayer, then maybe the budget, Title 6 and 7 would be, but if they're not, it's by being understanding from Mr. Vinci on the board, if they're not, then maybe it doesn't fit. So I'd be more than willing to work more on the issues.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out one thing as to the position becoming a private position or not. Every administration, except for Mark Begich's, there was a new administration, has made this same argument since the inception of this. Every new administration. So this is the first time it's been done in an audit form, but it's about the 4th time it's come up in front of us as board members. I had a discussion with Nancy, and it was part of her budget, and I can understand, if she takes a 10% budget cut, Lauren's part of her budget, and we say, well, Lauren's not going to receive the 10% reduction. And Nancy says, well, then that's an 11% reduction to my budget. That's not right. But so I understand that point. But the reason that that position was put into the original plan was because we thought we would have problems attracting an employee without being able to provide them with any benefit level, because we only were going to have one. And so it was the city's idea under the original ordinance provision to make that a city employee. And that's worked fine for 15 years. And Lauren has been an employee for how long, Lauren? 5 years. So now he's vested.
Just a quick correction on that, it was a joint decision.
Oh, correct. Well, exactly. But it was a joint decision. I apologize for that. But what I mean is the city was in agreement, is how I should have rephrased that. And Lauren is a vested employee now in PERS. And so if we said, okay, we're just going to take the money and hire Lauren as a private employee, he's going to have a 5-year investment in PERS, but not have the original promises of his PERS employment. And I just wanted to point that out. So this was a joint agreement. It's the way it's been done from the beginning. It has been approached by virtually every new administration that's come on except for Mark Baines.
Right. Frankly, I've been around long enough to remember Carol Watts for the 15 years and everything about that position. Greg?
I would like to say that the police and fire retirement plan has been around since 1968 or thereabouts, and this was negotiated in 1995. And if part of that negotiations was to make this medical trust a subpart of the police and fire retirement plan, they would have done that at that time. And looking at the documentation that was provided me when I became a board member last year, that was not the case. They actually created this separately for, I'm sure, distinct reasons, and most of that was put in a memorandum of understanding. It is not part of the code. Then the code was created after that. So I would expect that the police and fire retirement plan has a lot more members than the medical trust, because the medical trust is only limited to a specific group of people, and therefore I would guess that they would not be receptive to taking on another trust that only deals with a very small, minute portion of their membership, and then the increased costs that go along with it. That would be my guess. Lauren is the third person. There was Carol Watts, and then after Carol left, Ann Wells took the job for about a year, and then Lauren was hired. And to reiterate what Andy Provencio said, this has come up, in my understanding, several times before the board, every time a new administration takes place. The documentation I read basically states that the agreement is that the municipality will provide the funding for this position and hire the person, or have basically hold the person in that funded position, and then the trust actually directs that person as to what to do or what not to do, and the municipality has no control. And again, this has come up time and time again, and when I first took my seat on the board, this was brought up as one of the things that had occurred. And it wasn't very much longer in 2010 that it became an issue, but later in the year. It is difficult, in my opinion, for the plan administrator to come to work and then to work with the people in the municipality and then go to meetings where they're told to go do things. I know Carol Watt had a difficult time. She was first working out at the fire center out there off of admin offices off at Elmore, and they pulled her downtown to the office, and then they tried to give her extra work. Then the board had to become involved because we said, no, time out, this is our employee. Yes, it's funded by HR, but they do not do work for the municipality. They're not going to do employee relations work. And so there is, varied experiences with other people besides Lauren, that the same issue of, well, you either work for us or you don't know. They're an employee for the municipality, and agreement between the municipality and the police and fire departments was that this employee would work solely at the direction of the medical trust, not the municipality, although that person is funded through their budgetary unit. How they fund it, what budget unit they fund it out of, that's not the trust responsibility to decide how to do that. It is my understanding that because of the current talks about how this plan is funded, that a new position, funding budgetary unit, was created just for this position. That seems very smart and logical. However, for somebody within the municipality's administration to feel that they can call up Warren and say, okay, I need you to go and do this, that, and the other, or in the case of the furlough. I think it's important to realize that when decisions are made, that the trust relies on the decisions of either the trust attorney or the municipality's attorney. And these are recommendations or legal findings that the board has used to justify the actions about what the plan administrator does or doesn't do as far as his relationship with the municipality. And I can't help but think, from my observations at both the board meetings and the communications I'm aware of, that there's this anxiety as an administrative position with the municipality of trying to deal with the plan administrator who's going, I'm sorry, you're going to have to talk to the board about that, or I can't do that. And then it creates anxiety and possibly stressful situations, and I want to fall short of saying hostility towards the employee, but it's frustrating. I know as a municipal person myself before I retired, that would be difficult to understand. Why am I paying for this person and then I can't tell them what to do? So, I mean, there is a conflict there. And Nancy is correct, there is a provision in the original memorandum of understanding that the municipality could, in fact, give money to the trust, and then the trust could hire their own person. So there is that clause in there. So I just wanted to bring it up. I mean, I don't think there's any reason to take any of this personal as to how the thing was created in the first place. That's led to every administration questioning how is it a position that's funded, not controllable by the municipality, because it's a weird duck. I mean,
unique.
Let's face it. I mean, the municipality created the police and fire retirement plan, and all of those positions are the board over there. This is one that is rather unique.
$100 million was saved by creating this trust of unfunded liability to the churches.
Even if, before I call on Ms. Drummond, even if we wanted to take a vote as a committee, we don't have a quorum anymore, so. But Ms. Drummond?
I just want to say I appreciate the trust board, your hands-on attitude, and the fact that you're here and you're up to date and you've got the answers. There are a lot of boards in this town that don't think that way. Their board members have no idea what they're responsible for, but you guys, I think, you have a pretty good handle on it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Drummond. I was just told, after I invited folks to leave if they couldn't stay, just told I was just supposed to be in another meeting, but that's okay, I'm not going to worry about it right now, because I want to kind of deal with this to some extent. You know, we have the three issues before us right now, and it's Title 3, 6, and 7. And let me just ask the board, does the board have any issue with Title 6? And the only thing that Title 6 would say is that you have to present your budget to the Assembly for approval. That's it.
Well, I guess I'd like to comment on it.
Thank you.
As a board, we haven't really discussed it.
Okay.
So we haven't had a meeting on, do we think Title VI is
Gotcha.
good? Do
Gotcha.
we think it's bad?
Right.
The ordinance says that we're supposed to make ordinance changes.
Right.
Any changes to 3.87 is supposed to originate from the board.
Right.
We haven't addressed it yet. So
Right.
this is in the audit as a recommendation.
Right, and thank you for saying that, because I forgot about that. So let me say this, okay? I would like for you to present this audit finding to the board, since you just reminded me that the board is supposed to recommend changes to 3.87 on these three issues, and then make a recommendation for starters, to the Assembly, frankly. Would you Right, I'm asking you.
Let me just
to do that.
backtrack a second,
Okay.
since I just got on the board recently.
Gotcha.
Was the audit taken up by the board?
No, actually,
Okay.
I was present when a preliminary draft of the audit was presented to Lauren with Pete Raskins and Mike, I can't think of his last name right now. But it was my understanding that there was an agreement at that time. There would be a presentation to the board about the audit before it went to the assembly, and that never happened.
Okay.
We weren't approached or indicated the first time we heard about it was after it had already gone to the assembly. As far as the recommendations for Title 3, 6, and 7 and the not funding and those things, they were discussed in a preliminary finding, but again, in my opinion, our budget is so infinitesimal that as a unit division, or unit person with the police department, I had a budget that was substantially more than this budget is for office supplies and simple things. Quite frankly, we had a recommendation, or Lauren had a recommendation from IT to go to a system that police and fire was going to scan records, and it would save money and storage space. And this would save the municipality too, because they're required to provide the space in addition to his position. That was brought to the municipality IT department, and they brought it to the plan administrator position. That went to a committee that I believe Nancy was on. Police and fire retirement panels went through like that, and ours did not. And so I would say that there is definitely a hurdle, in my opinion, to changing this code to deal with Title 7, because we've already tried that process. And,
Right.
So I guess the answer is no, we haven't
Yeah.
taken
Right,
it up,
okay.
and we will take it up at
Right.
the next meeting
Thank
in
you.
March.
And before I go to Andy, I have my own opinion, frankly, but I wasn't talking about Title 7 necessarily, but Title 6, because throughout this meeting, I've heard, some comments on how folks feel about Title 7 and the amount of money that your budget is, okay? But Andy, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the audit, and I think that if you didn't do an audit, Peter, we'd have our own audit done. And if we got an audit, we would definitely review the recommendations. And I plan on the next meeting to ask the board to review these recommendations, each individual one, and consider them that way. So at the next board meeting, I can make that proposal. I can't make it here, but I can tell Lauren that I would like that placed on the agenda to vote on whether we should consider these recommendations, and I intend to do that.
Okay, great, and that's what I would like to see, and I would also ask Mr. Raskin, it's an open public meeting, right?
Correct, yes.
Would you mind attending that meeting when they talk about this, in case anybody has any questions?
do that.
That would be great.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the recommendations, and I think as fiduciaries, even if we disagree with the recommendations to it
Right,
initially, that as a fiduciary, we need to consider those recommendations objectively and to come up with reasons that we either want to or don't want to follow them. So I completely agree that that's prudent action, and I think that that's what you're asking.
So before I go to you, Mr. Monahan, so here we are, folks, okay? The board is going to put this issue on their agenda. Mr.
Yeah,
Raskin's going to be present, and if Ms. Sarah wants to be there, that's fine too.
Yeah,
I
I'd
can't,
be
sorry,
happy to,
but
if you'd like me to, but.
Sure.
I
That'd be
think
great.
it would be really, really great, okay? And then I'd like for the board to come back along with Mr. Raskin and Mr. Sarah and make a recommendation, well, present to us the findings, the recommendation from the board.
We'd be happy.
And we'll have another audit committee meeting to discuss what the board has to say about this, and then we'll take it from there. How's that? Mr. Honeman?
I just wanted to say thanks again for everybody being here, and I think the picture for me is even much more clear, and I actually walked in the room thinking I knew a lot about this restaurant, and so I learned a lot. And secondly is, no offense, but I know that being around different organizations that have had audits, that have audits by charter and statute and ordinance and policies and bylaws, not all recommendations of an audit are adopted. So, and I don't think there's any offense taken by Mr. Askin.
Right.
So,
Yeah, we appreciate the fact that you're allowing us to review and discuss it on ourselves.
Absolutely. So what's the time frame we're looking at here?
We have our next board meeting in March. We have a special board meeting in a couple weeks, but that's not on the
No, it doesn't
agenda.
have to be.
So
Yeah.
So our regular agenda, board meeting is when, Mark? March?
March 8th.
March 8th.
March 8th.
Okay,
And
and so-
I'm requesting that Lauren put this
And
on the
if you
agenda.
could, let me know when we've met, and then I can set up another committee meeting Okay, for maybe April,
Great.
after the 5th?
I will.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.